Action. Okay, we're on. So the live light is on. That's great. Welcome. Thank you for joining me on my conversation corner. Today I'm just reading a small selection from The Lessons of History by Will and Ariel Durant. Will Durant had a philosophy PhD from Columbia University. This is considered a very concise sort of, it's a summation of his philosophy as it relates to the interpretation of history. So I'll just start it from the very beginning. How are you guys doing, by the way? Everything good out there? I hope everyone's safe. Okay. Chapter 1. Hesitations. As his studies come to a close, the historian faces the challenge of what use have your studies been? Have you found in your work only the amusement of recounting the rise and fall of nations and ideas, and retelling sad stories of the death of kings? Have you learned more about human nature than the man in the street can learn without so much as opening a book? Have you derived from history any illumination as of our present condition, any guidance for our judgments and policies, any guard against the rebuffs of surprise or the vicissitudes of change? Have you found such regularities in the sequence of past events that you can predict the future actions of mankind or the fate of states? Is it possible that, after all, history has no sense, that it teaches us nothing, and that the immense past was only the wary rehearsal of the mistakes that the future is destined to make on a larger stage and scale? At times we feel so, and a multitude of doubts assail our enterprise. To begin with, do we really know what the past was, what actually happened, or is history a fable, not quite agreed upon? Our knowledge of any past event is always incomplete, probably inaccurate, beclouded by ambivalent evidence and biased historians, perhaps distorted by our own patriotic or religious partisanship. Most history is guessing, and the rest is prejudice. This is a little bit annoying. Maybe I should turn it off. Yeah, okay. Quieter. Even the historian who thinks to rise above partiality for his country, race, creed, or class betrays his secret predilection in his choice of materials and in the nuances of his adjectives. The historian always oversimplifies and hastily selects a manageable minority of facts and faces out of a crowd of souls and events whose multitudinous complexity he can never quite embrace or comprehend. Again, our conclusions from the past to the future are made more hazardous than ever by the acceleration of change. In 1909, Charles Peguy thought that the world changed less since Jesus Christ than in the last 30 years, and perhaps some young doctor of philosophy and physics would now add that his science has changed more since 1999 than in all recorded time before. Every year, sometimes in war every month, some new invention, method, or situation compels a fresh adjustment of behavior and ideas. Furthermore, an element of chance, perhaps of freedom, seems to enter into the conduct of metals and men. We are no longer confident that atoms, much less organisms, will respond in the future as we think they have responded in the past. The electrons, like Cowper's God, move in mysterious ways, their wonders to perform, and some quirk of character or circumstance may upset national equations, as when Alexander the Great drank himself to death and let his new empire fall apart in 323 BC, or as when Frederick the Great was saved from disaster by the accession of a Tsar infatuated with his Prussian ways in 1762. Obviously, historiography cannot be a science. It can only be an industry, an art, and a philosophy. An industry by ferreting out the facts, an art by establishing a meaningful order in the chaos of materials, a philosophy by seeking perspective and enlightenment. The present is the past rolled up for action, and the past is the present unrolled for understanding, or so we believe and hope. In philosophy, we try to see the part in the light of the whole. In the philosophy of history, we try to see this moment in the light of the past. We know that in both cases, this is a counsel of perfection. Total perspective is an optical illusion. We do not know the whole of man's history. There were probably many civilizations before the Sumerian or the Egyptian. We have just begun to dig. We must operate with partial knowledge and be provisionally content with probabilities. In history, as in science and politics, relativity rules and all formulas should be suspect. History smiles at all attempts to force its flow into theoretical patterns or logical grooves. It plays havoc with our generalizations, breaks all our rules. History is baroque. Perhaps, within these limitations, we can learn enough from history to bear reality patiently and respect one another's delusions. Since man is a moment in astronomic time, a transient guest of the earth, a spore of his species, a scion of race, a composite of body, character, and mind, a member of a family and a community, a believer or doubter of a faith, a unit in an economy, perhaps a citizen in a state or a soldier in an army, we may ask, under the corresponding heads, astronomy, geology, geography, biology, ethnology, psychology, morality, religion, economics, politics, and war, what history has to say about the nature, conduct, and prospects of man. It is a precarious enterprise, and only a fool would try to compress 100 centuries into 100 pages of hazardous conclusions. We proceed. Chapter 2. History and the Earth. Let us define history in its troublesome duplexity as the events or record of the past. Human history is a brief spot in space, and its first lesson is modesty. At any moment a comet may come too close to the Earth and set our little globe turning topsy-turvy in a hectic course, or choke its men in fleas with fumes of heat, or a fragment of the smiling sun may slip off tangentially, as some think our planet did a few astronomic moments ago, and fall upon us in a wild embrace, ending all grief and pain. We accept these possibilities in our stride, and retort to the cosmos in the words of Pascal, "When the universe has crushed him, man will still be nobler than that which kills him because he knows that he is dying, and of its victory the universe knows nothing." History is subject to geology. Every day the sea encroaches somewhere on our land, or the land upon the sea. Cities disappear under the water, and sunken cathedrals ring their melancholy bells. Mountains rise and fall in the rhythm of emergence and erosion. Rivers swell and flood, or dry up, or change their course. Valleys become deserts, and isthmuses become straits. To the geologic eye, all the surface of the earth is a fluid form, and man moves upon it as insecurely as Peter walking on the waves to Christ. Climate no longer controls us as severely as Montesquieu and Buckle supposed, but it limits us. Man's ingenuity often overcomes geological handicaps. He can irrigate deserts and air-condition the Sahara. He can level or surmount mountains and terrace the hills with vines. He can build a floating city to cross the ocean, or gigantic birds to navigate the sky. By the way, lots of male pronouns. I guess, it's an old book. What can you do? Right, but a tornado can ruin in an hour the city that took a century to build. An iceberg can overturn or bisect the floating palace and send 1,000 merrymakers gurgling to the great certainty. Let rain become too rare and civilization disappears under sand, as in Central Asia. Let it fall too furiously and civilization will be choked with jungle, as in Central America. Let the thermal average rise by 20 degrees in our thriving zones, and we should probably relapse into lethargic savagery. In a semi-tropic climate, a nation of 500 million souls may breed like ants, but innervating heat may subject it to repeated conquest by warriors from more stimulating habitats. Generations of people established a growing mastery over the earth, but they are destined to become fossils in its soil. geography is the matrix of history, its nourishing mother and disciplining home. Its rivers, lakes, oases, and oceans draw settlers to their shores. For water is the life of organisms and towns, and offers inexpensive roads for transport and trade. Egypt was the gift of the Nile, and Mesopotamia built successive civilizations between the rivers and along their effluent canals. India was the daughter of the Indus, and, Brahmaputra and the Ganges. China owed its life and sorrows to the great rivers that, like ourselves, often wandered from their proper beds and fertilized the neighborhood with their overflow. Italy adorned the valleys of the Tiber, the Arno, and the Po. Austria grew along the Danube, Germany along the Elbe and the Rhine, France along the Rhone, the Lier, and the Seine. Petra and Palmyra were nourished by oases in the desert. When the Greeks grew too numerous for their boundaries, they founded colonies along the Mediterranean, like frogs across a pond, said Plato, and along the Euxine, or Black Sea. For 2,000 years, from the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC to the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, the northern and southern shores of the Mediterranean were the rival seats of humanity's ascendancy. And then, Europe, I guess. But in and after 1492, the voyages of Columbus and Vasco da Gama invited men to brave the oceans. The sovereignty of the Mediterranean was challenged. Genoa, Pisa, Florence, Venice declined. The Renaissance began to fade. The Atlantic nations rose and finally spread their suzerainty over half the world. Suzerainty. S-U-Z-E-R-A-I-N-T-Y. Suzerainty. I'm going to have to learn why that is not, why that's a more suitable word than sovereignty. Westward, the course of empire takes its way, wrote George Berkeley about 1730. Will it continue across the Pacific, exporting European and American industrial and commercial techniques to China as formerly to Japan? Will Oriental fertility working with the latest Occidental technology bring the decline of the West? This was from like 1950. The development of the airplane will again alter the map of civilization. Trade routes will follow less and less the rivers and seas. Men and goods will be flown more and more directly to their goal. Countries like England and France will lose the commercial advantage of abundant coastlines conveniently indented. Countries like Russia, China, and Brazil, which were hampered by the excess of their landmass over their coasts, will cancel part of that handicap by taking to the air. Coastal cities will derive less of their wealth from the clumsy business of transferring goods from ship to train or from train to ship. When sea power finally gives place to air power in transport and war, we shall have seen one of the basic revolutions in history. The influence of geographic factors diminishes as technology grows. The character and contour of a terrain may offer opportunities for agriculture, mining, or trade, but only the imagination and initiative of leaders and the hardy industry of followers can transform the possibilities into fact, and only a similar combination, as in Israel today, can make a culture take form over 1,000 natural obstacles. We, not the earth, make civilization. Biology and history. History is a fragment of biology. The life of one of us is a portion of the vicissitudes of organisms on land and sea. Sometimes, wandering alone in the woods on a summer day, we hear or see the movement of 100 species flying, leaping, creeping, crawling, burrowing, and the startled animals scurrying away at our coming. The birds scatter, the fish disperse in the brook. Suddenly we perceive to what a perilous minority we belong in this impartial planet, and for a moment we feel, as these very denizens clearly do, that we are passing interlopers in their natural habitat. Then, all the chronicles and achievements of humanity fall humbly into the history and perspective of polymorphous life. All our economic competition, our strife for mates, our hunger and love and grief and war are akin to the seeking, mating, striving, and suffering that hide under these fallen trees or leaves, or in the waters, or on the boughs. Therefore, the laws of biology are the fundamental lessons of history. We are subject to the processes and trials of evolution, to the struggle for existence and the survival of the fittest to survive. If some of us seem to escape the strife of the trials, it is because our group protects us, but that group itself must meet the tests of survival. So the first biological lesson of history is that life is competition. Competition is not only the life of trade, it is the trade of life. Peaceful when food abounds, violent when the mouths outrun the food. Animals eat one another without qualm. Civilized people consume one another by due process of law. Cooperation is real and increases with social development, but mostly because it is a tool and form of competition. We cooperate in our group, our family, community, club, church, party, race, or nation, in order to strengthen our group in its competition with other groups. Competing groups have the qualities of competing individuals: acquisitiveness, pugnacity, partisanship, and pride. Our states, being ourselves multiplied, are what we are. They write our natures in bolder type, and do our good and evil on an elephantine scale. We are acquisitive, greedy, and pugnacious because our blood remembers millenniums through which our forebears had to chase and fight and kill in order to survive, and had to eat to their gastric capacity for fear they should not soon capture another feast. War is a nation's way of eating. It promotes cooperation because it is the ultimate form of competition. Until our states become members of a large and effectively protective group, they will continue to act like individuals and families in the hunting stage. The second biological lesson of history is that life is selection. In the competition for food or mates or power, some organisms succeed and some fail. In the struggle for existence, some individuals are better equipped than others to meet the test of survival. Since nature, here meaning total reality in its processes, has not read very carefully the American Declaration of Independence or the French Revolutionary Declaration of the Rights of Man, we are all born unfree and unequal, subject to our physical and psychological heredity and to the customs and traditions of our group, diversely endowed in health and strength, in mental capacity and qualities of character. Nature loves difference as the necessary material of selection and evolution. Identical twins differ in 100 ways, and no two peas are alike. Inequality is not only natural and inborn, it grows with the complexity of civilization. Hereditary inequalities breed social and artificial inequalities. Every invention or discovery is made or seized by the exceptional individual and makes the strong stronger, the weak relatively weaker than before. Economic development specializes functions, differentiates abilities, and makes people unequally valuable to their groups. If we knew our fellow people thoroughly, we could select 30% of them whose combined ability would equal that of all the rest. Life and history do precisely that, with a sublime injustice reminiscent of Calvin's God. Nature smiles at the union of freedom and equality in our utopias. For freedom and equality are sworn and everlasting enemies, and when one prevails, the other dies. Leave people free, and their natural inequalities will multiply, almost geometrically, as in England and America in the 19th century under laissez-faire. To check the growth of inequality, liberty must be sacrificed, as in Russia after 1917. Even when repressed, inequality grows. Only the person who is below average in economic ability desires equality. Those who are conscious of their own superior ability desire freedom, and in the end, superior ability has its way. Utopias of equality are biologically doomed, and the best that the amiable philosopher can hope for is an approximate equality of legal justice and educational opportunity. A society in which all potential abilities are allowed to develop and function will have a survival advantage in the competition of groups. This competition becomes more severe as the destruction of distance intensifies the confrontation of states. The third biological lesson of history is that life must breed. Nature has no use for organisms, variations, or groups that cannot reproduce abundantly. She has a passion for quantity as prerequisite to the selection of quality. She likes large litters and relishes the struggle that picks the surviving few. Doubtless she looks on approvingly at the upstream race of 1,000 sperms to fertilize an ovum. She's more interested in the species than the individual, and makes little difference between a civilization and barbarism. She does not care that a high birth rate has usually accompanied a culturally low civilization, and a low birth rate a civilization culturally high. And she, here meaning nature as the process of birth, variation, competition, selection, and survival, sees to it that a nation with a low birth rate shall be periodically chastened by some more virile and fertile group. Gaul survived against the Germans through the help of Roman legions in Caesar's days, and through the help of British and American legions in our time. When Rome fell, the Franks rushed in from Germany and made Gaul France. If England and America should fall, France, whose population remained almost stationary through the 19th century, might again fall. If the human brood is too numerous for the food supply, nature has three agents for restoring the balance: famine, pestilence, and war. In a famous essay on population in 1798, Thomas Malthus explained that without these periodic checks, the birth rate would so far exceed the death rate that the multiplication of mouths would nullify any increase in the production of food. Though he was a clergyman and a man of goodwill, Malthus pointed out that the issuance of relief funds or supplies to the poor encouraged them to marry early and breed improvidently, making the problem worse. In a second edition in 1803, he advised abstention from coitus except for reproduction, but he refused to approve other methods of birth control. It's weird. Having little hope of acceptance for this counsel or of sanctity, he predicted that the balance between mouths and food would be maintained in the future, as in the past, by famine, pestilence, and war, and coronavirus. The advances of agriculture and contraceptive technology in the 19th century apparently refuted Malthus. In England, the United States, Germany, and France, the food supply kept pace with births, and the rising standard of living deferred the age of marriage and lowered the size of the family. The multiplication of consumers was also a multiplication of producers. New hands developed new lands to raise more food. In the recent spectacle of Canada and the United States exporting millions of bushels of wheat while avoiding famine and pestilence at home, it seems to provide a living answer to Malthus. When existing agricultural knowledge is finally spread to the rest of the planet, we could feed twice our present population. Malthus would answer, of course, that this solution merely postpones the calamity. There is a limit to the fertility of the soil. Every advance in agricultural technology is sooner or later cancelled by the excess of births over deaths, and meanwhile medicine, sanitation, and charity nullify selection by keeping the unfit alive to multiply their like. Yikes. To which Hope replies, the advances of industry, urbanization, education, and standards of living in countries that now endanger the world by their fertility will probably have the same effect there in reducing the birth rate as they have had in Europe and North America. Until that equilibrium of production and reproduction comes, it will be a counsel of humanity to disseminate the knowledge and means of contraception. Ideally, parentage should be a privilege of health and not a byproduct of sexual agitation. Is there any evidence that birth control is dysgenic, that it lowers the intellectual level of the nation practicing it? Presumably, it has been used. This must have been some weird rumor. Sounds like the 60s. It's been used more by the intelligent than the simple, and the labors of educators are cancelled in each generation by the fertility of the uninformed. But much of what we call intelligence is the result of individual education, opportunity, and experience, and there is no evidence that such intellectual acquirements are transmitted in the genes. Even the children of PhDs must be educated and go through their adolescent measles of errors, dogmas, and isms. Nor can we say how much potential ability and genius lurk in the chromosomes of the harassed and handicapped poor. Biologically, physical vitality may be at birth of greater value than intellectual pedigree. Nietzsche thought that the best blood in Germany was in peasant veins. Philosophers are not the fittest material from which to breed the race. These are theories. Family limitation played some part in the history of Greece and Rome. It is amusing to find Julius Caesar offering, in 59 BC, rewards to Romans who had many children, and forbidding childless women to ride in litters or wear jewelry. Augustus renewed this campaign some 40 years later. with like futility. Birth control continues to spread in the upper classes, while new stocks from the Germanic north and the Greek or Semitic east replenish and alter the population of Italy. Did, past tense. Very probably this change reduced the ability or willingness of the inhabitants to resist governmental incompetence and external attack. In the United States, the lower birth rate of some people has lessened their economic and political power. The higher birth rate of Roman Catholic families suggests that by the year 2000, the Roman Catholic Church will be the dominant force in national affairs. Nah, that didn't come true. A similar process is helping to restore Catholicism in France, Switzerland, and Germany. The lands of Voltaire, Calvin, and Luther may soon return to the papal fold. Okay, that did not come true. So the birth rate, like war, may determine the fate of theologies, just as the defeat of the Muslims at Tours in 732 kept France and Spain from replacing the Bible with the Quran. So the superior organization, discipline, morality, fidelity, and fertility of Catholics may cancel the Protestant Reformation and the French Enlightenment. There is no humorous like history. Okay. What do I say about that? It's like, that didn't come true. But I get his point. Like, when people have babies, the stuff they like gets passed on. It's why, like, a friend of mine once made a joke that people who like rock music got along with their dads. It's funny. And that's probably where I'm going to close for now. After that, it gets even crazier. Thanks very much, and keep thinking.